thanks everyone for coming out this afternoon. For those that don't know me, my name is Angie Jones. I'm director of the Family Business Center. We have a great program for you this afternoon. We have Olivier and Robert, authors of Line of Sight. John's going to give them a little more detailed bio in a few minutes, but I wanted to thank you all for coming. We're going to go through the program, then we're going to have some great pizza and more networking time afterwards. But I did want to take a moment and thank Hylant for sponsoring this event for us. Hylant has been a friend and a sponsor of the center for a long time, and we very much appreciate that partnership. And I'm going to pass this off to Tony. Okay, like where you at? Tony, just to say a few words.
Thanks, Angie. Welcome all. I'm Tony Pacco. I work at Hylant, and I am our Chief Strategy Officer. So Sarah Best came to me, it's been several months now, and said, hey, we're doing some great work around strategy. She knew that we sponsor some events at the Family Business Center, and she said, could we co-opt and bring the team in and talk strategy? And I think it's a great idea. One is being in a family business for a long time, I knew how important it was to have new ideas, and I think one of Hyland's roles in all of this is to be able to sponsor events like this. So it really is a pleasure to do something like this that's also a little bit more near and dear to my heart. I know we sponsored events like employee benefits forums and things like that in the past, but this is exciting for me. So I'm going to share literally in 3 minutes what strategy is for us at Hylant. These folks do it every day. They do it for a living. They work with a lot of different companies, so they're going to be able to bring a lot of different perspectives, and hopefully we can all walk away with a little bit more about what strategy means for us individually. I hear a lot today, and even in our organization, folks will say, hey, we need a strategy for our HR. We need a strategy for this. We need a strategy for onboarding people. We need a strategy for our team in Columbus, Ohio. And and I'm not sure why that has changed, or if it really has changed, I've just paid more attention to it. That's off, Ron. I can talk. So what I've questioned them and I've challenged them with is that really, do you need a plan or do you need a strategy? And if you need a strategy, what's the difference between the two? Because I think those things can be interchangeable at times in people's vocabulary, but I don't quite think they are. And I think there's a big difference. And so to me, as I grew up, strategy meant more around making choices, right? So we talked about that a second ago when we met was, do you have the ability in your business as a leader to make a choice? And that choice, to me, should be controversial by nature, right? It should be, I'm willing to do this, but I'm not, in doing that, and you can give your example, it's a great one later, in doing this, I'm not going to do that. So if I'm going to commit to A, I'm going to commit to A or A and B, and I'm not going to commit to C. And I think that is really difficult for a lot of organizations. Hylant, we sell insurance. Think of how difficult it is for us to say, you know what, we're not going to just sell insurance to everybody in every type of business who does everything. That's really hard for us to get our arms around. We're really good in these areas, and we're not good in, say, large energy in Houston, Texas. Okay, well, let's not do energy in Houston, Texas then, right? Versus, well, maybe we should do it and we stick our toe in the water a little bit. So it is around making those tough choices. And I ask you to think about that as you kind of go forward in your businesses. How does that apply to you? The last kind of point I'll make is strategy has a lot to do with patience as well, right? Fortunately, as a family business at Hylant, we are a very patient organization. We're not tied to quarterly earnings, as many of you are not, as well as family businesses. So you have the patience to see a strategy through. I think that's a huge advantage that we have in family business. And I think the last thing that sometimes people don't talk about is luck and how luck plays a role. I mean, you position yourselves in the right place at the right time. The example I was thinking about when I came over here is Elon Musk, and many people don't realize this. Elon, most of his money that he made to start was PayPal, right? And if you think about PayPal, that existed forever. Like the idea of transferring money, you know, Western Union, it's been around. PayPal was nothing new. What changed PayPal was eBay, right? And people wanting and being able to sell things in a marketplace where you had to pay someone before they could ship the goods. So right place, right time, good idea. But they also had the, they also had the ability to do something pretty unique at the time. So enjoy today. I am proud to present these guys, and hopefully we'll all learn something, including myself. So good luck. Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. And yeah, this is working. Okay, I just wanted to say hello. My name is John Brower, and on behalf of Real Good Ventures, working with Hylant to be able to bring this to you is great. Many of you know us, my partner, Sarah Best, also my co-host on the Boss Hole Chronicles. Some of you have said you like it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We've worked with a lot of the affinity groups around behavioral dynamics using the predictive index, team dynamics, and so forth. This is another part of the kind of work we do because as Tony talks about strategy, there's two other words I want you to think about: execution and alignment. Because when we were first introduced to Line of Sight, and Robert and Olivier, we hear a lot about strategy, but the key is how confident are we on the execution and alignment of strategy throughout our organization. So joining us today, and all of this work culminated in a book. And by the way, everybody tonight, you're going to get a book back here after the remarks when we're socializing and having pizza and all that other good stuff. Make sure you get a copy of the book. Most of you actually completed the Line of Sight Insights scan, and I sent you your results. For those of you that didn't, the link will still work. But this is an opportunity to look differently at your organization around things like execution and alignment. So let me introduce our panel. Of course, Sarah Best, my amazing partner from Real Good Ventures. Robert Corser. Robert Corser is the CEO of the Line of Sight organization. We've known Robert for a number of years. An interesting fact about Robert, before he got into the world of organizational performance and talent, actually spent a number of years as an executive chef, not only in Pittsburgh, but also in Detroit. And so when we were both renovating our kitchens, his is much nicer than mine. But I was just really captivated by that side of Robert's life. But we've been privileged to know Robert and the work that he has done around strategy execution. And I would be remiss if I also didn't introduce the co-author of the book, Olivier Aries. Now, Olivier is currently from Boston. I'm sorry, Robert, you're up in just outside of Ann Arbor, correct? Olivier comes to us from Boston, and you'll notice from his accent, right from Boston. I'm kidding, he's from Normandy, France, originally. But we've also known Olivier for a while. Interestingly enough, he claims to be a recovered business consultant, and also was the instrumental in some of the Harvard Business School case studies. Is that correct? I just want to make sure. And one interesting fact about his world is that in his first job, he actually sold uranium to Korea. Yes, you'll hear nothing about that today. But between Robert and Olivier and the remarkable work that they've done, they put this in a book, and we are so very glad and privileged that you are joining us tonight. And with that, we're going to turn it over to the panel. Sarah's going to walk through some questions with our guests. We'll open it up to the floor for questions specifically. Anybody have any questions once their remarks are done? And we're just glad that you're here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over.
Thank you, John. Thanks for joining us today. If we accomplish something tonight, it might be that we crack the code a bit on execution of strategy. It seems to me that strategy is not that difficult to design, but to deliver and implement the strategy has always eluded us. So why this concept, gentlemen, and why now?
As we've been working with clients for the past several years, one of the things that's become more and more apparent is they're suffering from like profitless prosperity. So top line revenues are going up, but they're not making any money. And when we really looked at like what's going on there, it's an execution gap. They're getting burned by the last 6 inches. We started to kind of, when we were putting together this tool, we were looking at different things, and we brought in the IO psychologist to kind of come up with what are the 5 keys to execution. And what we see most common is there's a major gap in strategic understanding. Now, most of the executive team tends to be pretty aligned around that, but as you go down through the organization, through the different stratums, the gap widens. So that's why we're doing this now. That's why we wrote the book.
Thank you for having me. If you haven't tried the pizza yet, it's excellent. So just this, I think, was worth the trip for me. I like simplicity. Maybe I'm not like super smart, but I like when things are simple enough to understand. And when I was in grad school, and it was a while ago, more than 20 years ago, I probably had, I think, 5 classes on strategy over 2 years, and I had 0 classes on execution. I had classes on budgeting, I had classes on manufacturing, on supply chain, on accountability, on leadership, but I never had a class that said, here is how you're going to bring all this together. And I think over the past, 30 years, in my head, I've been trying to find a way to bring together all the strands that allow you to have a shot at being successful in your strategy, whatever your goals are. But how do you make it happen? I think that's the question we were trying to solve with this book. So that's why we decided to do it.
Good, thank you. We'll get to the central concept of the book, but before you get there, what is line of sight? Help us understand.
Line of sight's it's a mindset. It's a methodology. Taking a look at objective data and making decisions, that guide the expenditure of funds. How are we communicating across the organization? That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I'd love to ask a question here. How many of you are either familiar with or are using some of the principle of Mr. Lencioni, Patrick Lencioni?
That'd be the 5 dysfunctions of a team, organizational health, the advantage.
The advantage. I see some hands being raised. So his concept is essentially that for a company to be successful and to do whatever, execute whatever strategy or objective you have, all the pieces has to be aligned for this objective. Like if you want to innovate, create something new, then you have to have an organization. You have to have metrics. You have to have a style of leadership that is conducive to innovation. Conversely, if you are all about winning because your product is the cheapest in the marketplace, that's probably not the same model. Right? You have to think differently. Maybe the people that you're going to have in your organization are different. So Lencioni's mindset has always been, how do you align all those elements so that they get you the result you want? And Lencioni will be the first one to admit that he's not very quantitative. He's more of a concept guy. And in many ways, line of sight, it's not really a revolutionary concept. It's a way to bring data to this idea of alignment so that you know where your strengths are in your organization, what your people are good at, what you have a good chance to succeed in, and where the gaps are. And some of you took the assessment. You've seen that it's really not rocket science. There's a bunch of questions, but hopefully we'll have a chance to look at some of the results that you shared with us. And hopefully you'll see the power of just those few questions to understand what your organization is good at and what your organization is not so good at. That's what Lencioni calls organizational health. And essentially, we're just like an X-ray that allows you to measure the organization health of your organization, the same way as your doctor would tell you whether you're in good health or not. So that's the concept behind line of sight, using data to know how well you're doing.
And would that be the central concept in the book? Are we gonna find in the book that there's kind of a roadmap to follow to accomplish that?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Let's talk about the 5 keys to strategic execution. Just so we're aware, they're listed. They're posted here on the back of the wall on our screens. Yeah, give us the lowdown.
So there are 5 keys to execution, or KSEs: strategic understanding, leadership, balanced metrics, activity structure, and human capital. Okay, 2 of these 5 have a stronger correlation than the others: strategic understanding and activities and structure. When there's gaps in strategic understanding, it proliferates all the other KSEs. Okay, so do I understand the strategy? Does my team understand the strategy? How do we contribute to it? How are we different from our competitors? Does the leadership team have trust to deliver the execution of strategy? Does the leadership team do change management? Are we measuring the right stuff? Activities and structure. Does strategy prioritize day-to-day activity for all employees? And then are we sharing, do we have the right people in the right seats? Are we sharing information across the organization? And then most important in that is that middle, market discipline. There are three main go-to-market strategies in market discipline, okay? Operational excellence, product and service innovation, and customer intimacy. When we normally look at results from a leadership team, there tends to be kind of some gaps there. Now, when they're wearing their function hats, there's going to be different go-to-market strategies for each function, but overall, there'll be one main go-to-market strategy for a company.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure.
Strategy.
So think Apple, okay? Is Apple traded on price? Do they make customized solutions for each customer? No, it's cutting edge, sometimes even bleeding edge, okay? So they celebrate experimentation. They don't punish failures, okay? So it's all about the newest, the latest, the greatest.
So that's going to be innovation, is that correct? I'm over here, Robert, sorry. So that's innovation, that's the innovation component,
It's
right?
product and service innovation, yes.
Product and service innovation. New, not being done, front end. Okay, what about the other two?
So, think manufacturing when you think operational excellence, okay? We're being commoditized, we're being traded on price. We want to limit variation. We want to limit decision-making from frontline employees. It's kind of a control model, and it's about capturing the most on the penny. And then customer intimacy.
I was going to say like Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon. Customer intimacy, think Disney, okay? The greatest storytellers in the world. Okay, they build a customized solution for people that, has anyone been ever on like a Disney cruise with their family? How is that? Is that operational excellence? Yeah, it's everything you want. One of the cool things, as a former restaurateur and someone who believes in genuine hospitality, each staff member that works for Disney has a budget, just like the Ritz-Carlton, where they can spoil a guest. So, true, genuine hospitality, customer intimacy.
Can I add something? Right before the session started, I was talking to some of you, and I had a side conversation here, and I think one of you said, "But we're talking about small companies here. I have a small business. Is it really working?" And the answer is yes. In fact, I think it's surprising how universal those principles apply from large companies like Disney. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about some others who are in the news. But also really small companies. The principles are the same. These days I'm working with a company who has about 80, 90 employees in the healthcare business. Company's been founded by the founder, who's still the CEO, a very successful woman in her own right. But we started to work together because for some reason they're struggling to really execute well. And the symptom of this, maybe some of you can relate, is that after, I think, 20 years of uninterrupted growth, last year for the... 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you. Yep. I can speak. That's systemic? No, okay. 1, 2, 3. Sorry. For the first time in 20 years, her revenues have dipped, and they're not quite sure why. Everything, no drastic change in the marketplace, in their pricing, everything is normal. But then, they called on me, and we started to use line of sight. We did the survey, and then I did interviews of the employees. And so what happened is that they didn't quite realize this, but their model is based on customer intimacy, which for them means they run bioanalytic services, which mean that they help big truck companies launch new drugs. And so those drugs have to be tested before they're being launched, and they provide all the analytical support for that launch. But they've grown without quite realizing it by being outrageously flexible for their customers. Whatever the customer wants, we'll do it. No matter what the cost, no matter the amount of effort and grit it takes, we'll do it. And that's the way they win in the marketplace. Now, what can be the downside of this? Very high cost, and their employees are exhausted. And I got them at the time when they were like, I don't know how long this can continue. So what we're trying to do right now is helping them scale up, because they want to continue to grow for the next probably 15 years. But they can't grow the same way. They just can't grow with the same model. They just can't work their employees more because they're already at 110% of capacity. So using this and the data that we found, we helped them refocus their strategy and say, can we find a way to still be somewhat flexible to our customers, but we're going to have also to be more rigorous. We're going to have to drop our prices. We're going to have to standardize. We're going to have to say no. I think we had a lot of conversation about saying no. We're going to have to say no to some clients who are too demanding, because if we want to grow and keep our prices down, we're going to have to operate more efficiently. So their strategic decision of what kind of clients we want to serve is going to drive the way they operate. They're going to need more processes, more automation, more machine, more data, and they're going to have to hire people who are different. People who are more focused on efficiency, do things better, faster. So that's an example. And again, 80, I don't know how many of you have companies in the 50 to 80 people range, but presumably a number of you. All those principles and those issues, they're universal, and they apply to companies who are 15 employees to 15,000.
Let's see if this works. It does. So we've got the market discipline, the idea that we need to know how we go to market. We've talked about strategic understanding. How significant is leadership as a KSE, as a strategy, in affecting strategy? Tell us about leadership, and then let's talk about human capital.
So leadership is extremely important. Do the employees trust leadership to lead the execution of strategy? I can't tell you how many times I talk to a leadership team and I'm like, what's your guys' strategy? What do you think they tell me? To grow. Okay, is that a strategy? No, it's a desired outcome. I want to kind of give you a little bit about, for me, strategy is about creating advantage to help us achieve our goal. Okay? Strategies change, they're nimble, we can pivot and parry. Leadership has to relentlessly communicate that throughout the organization. I think science says someone needs to hear it 17 times before it'll actually sink in. So, is leadership credible to do that? Does leadership practice change management? Do they spend a month going back and forth in an office and then tell everyone and then expect them to do it 2 days later? How often does that happen? What does that do to the workforce? Makes them kind of reverberate back and forth. So, leadership is a very strong key to execution. And, having that trust, doing what you say you're going to do 100% of the time, being transparent when you can, super important.
So, Robert, those are two ways you just mentioned about how leadership can build and cultivate that trust in communication. Is there anything either one of you would add to that? Because what if you're sitting there and you're thinking, I think they trust us. I think we're trustworthy. But to be sure, what are some things people need to do now? Go ahead. What's that? Yeah.
So it's interesting because I'm working with a company right now who isn't doing quite well, and they are contemplating a number of tough decisions that are going to impact their workforce, and so the question of trust came up because I'm working with the CEO, and his main question is how can I make sure that my employees trust that whatever new plan we're going to put in place is going to really work, and that there's not going to be another wave of people that we're going to have to let go. So although it's maybe a little bit at the margin of line of sight as an analytical tool, there's ways to build trust as a leader when you're in a tough spot. In fact, there's a lot of research on this. One of which is being transparent and authentic, which sounds easier said than done. But one element of building trust is to be open to people about the logic that you're following. And if you have tough decisions to make, some people might take exception with them and say, I don't think that's the right approach, or I don't think that's the right strategy, or how do you know it's going to work? But I found time and again that when you explain why you came to a particular decision, people will be more willing to accept it, even if they disagree with the ultimate outcome. So we touch a little bit on this in the book. But you can't really have any sort of successful execution, meaning that you can't expect people to do the right thing for the organization if they don't believe that you're the right person for the job and that you understand the business enough to make good decisions. So transparency and explaining your logic is one of the fundamental ingredients of building trust.
That was good. Thank you. I'm going to change my question that I already said. I'm looking at activities and structure as a key strategic area. Maybe human capital is what we talk about after activities and structure. Maybe it doesn't matter, but activities and structure pertains to, if this is what we said we're going to do, how are we lined up to do it? What things are we doing? And the human capital is, who do we have doing it? Tell us more about what we need to understand there.
So once again, activities and structure is the second strongest correlation to execution. Does strategy prioritize day-to-day activity for all employees? It provides focus on what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. It helps us develop defaults and decision gates. Does this violate what we're trying to achieve? Then we're not going to do it. And decision gates are the blinders that we look at to kind of do that. And strategy has to prioritize day-to-day activity for all employees. And I could say that 50 more times, and it wouldn't be enough.
Do we think it would be the right time to show the scores?
Yeah.
We can,
Yeah.
So if you turn around, so overall, the amalgamation of everyone in this room had an overall health index of 75%. Okay? When we break that down by the keys, we had an overall 82% average on strategic understanding, 74% on leadership, 3% on balance metrics, 73 on activity structure, and 78 on human capital. Now, the highest that we had on strategic understanding was 96%, and the lowest was 57%. This is congruent with what we normally see when we present to a group. We've got a bunch of people that 100%, a bunch of people that are really, really hard on themselves. And, it's somewhere in the middle. Remember, this is a myopic one-person view. When you compare this to the leadership team, the managers, and the employees, gaps start forming. So we had 100% on leadership and 33% lowest on leadership. Balance metrics, some of us don't measure anything. Some of us measure everything, okay? So overall, 64%. And then activities and structure, 100% was the highest, 0 was the lowest. And human capital, 100% and 33% were the lowest. Now, my question to you is that 82% on strategic understanding. If you ask just your leadership team or your managers, do you think that number would stay the same, go up, or go down? Thoughts? This is interactive.
I'm seeing some heads nod. So the question is, if other people weighed in, would that number go up or down? What are your thoughts?
I think go down. Usually down.
Go down?
Correct.
Can I ask that in a different way too? We had some people, a number of you from the same organization complete the scan. Did anybody compare their results? Okay, you should. And we talked about that. And that's essentially what this is, because as Robert said, this is my way of looking at it. And so when you think of the strata, Robert, can you talk a little bit more and when you say strata, it sounds really fancy, but what it means is we're looking deeply into each of the key levels of the organization, executive managers, frontline. That's when we really start to see that divergence of the information. So nobody compared yet. Okay. Because that's usually when we do this for a CEO or a business owner, the usual reaction is, I wonder what everybody else thinks. And that's really where you get the benefit of the objective data. All right, thanks for that.
What you do with this data, this creates an environment of self-inspection and self-correction. We take a look at a baseline of where we're at as a company, we do corrective action, and then we send out pulse checks to measure to see if our efforts are actually moving the needle. So if there's a big gap in strategic understanding, the prescription is tell them what the strategy is. Have a town hall. Tell them. Have the managers in their manager meetings talk about it. Have the supervisors talk about it in their huddles. And then a month later, pulse check and see if those efforts are actually moving the needle.
Can you go back one slide? Would you mind? So if we use this as, let's just say this was our company, okay? Stubborn Brothers Pizza Night Company Incorporated. And these are our results. We would never try to handle all of this at once. But walk us through, Robert and/or Olivier, what your strategy or your approach would be for a client to say, okay, if these are your results, this is where we start.
So even though it's an 82%, I see that as an opportunity there. My immediate response would be like, let's craft a town hall, okay? The second thing is let's start measuring the right stuff, okay? What do your current leading and lagging indicators look like? What are you measuring? And then the lens that I view on are we gonna measure it is, if we measure it and we find something out, are we gonna do something different? If the answer is yes, that's the qualifier that we should measure that. Just don't measure because you can. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with 92 KPIs, and they're going to spend all their time trying to hit KPIs, and it's unachievable. So, I mean, those would be the first two areas that I would prioritize and I would spend time on.
Well, I'd say that when you look at this, I told you I like simple things. So for me, I call that the reverse banana. It's like a banana put on the side, right, looking like this. And in nearly every company, metrics is the weak point. And it sounds like for this group, for those of you who feel that the assessment, that's the same thing. Metrics are a little bit of a weak point. Although it's fundamental, and I think because metrics are a little bit more involving to put in place than talking about your strategy with your employees, I think it's the one that gets the least attention. I'll give you one example from the days when I was a management consultant. It was a very, very large company, more on the 15,000 employee side than 15. But we worked with their call centers. It was a big organization, so they had to have hundreds of people manning the phones for customer who would call. And they decided to use the call centers to do some selling. So when people would call with a request, a question, the associate was supposed to go through a little pitch to say, oh, by the way, would you need X, Y, and Z? And on principle, it was a great idea. But the problem was that the associates were incentivized on the cycle time, like how many calls per hour they could process. And they would receive bonuses. The people who could process the largest number of callers at the bigger bonus. So how do you think it worked with the sale? The script never got told because they were like, sorry, man, next person, ding, and they would hang up on you without having done the pitch. And you would think it's basic. But if you don't think about how you're going to execute and succeed in your strategy, which in this case was we need more sales through our call centers, unless you think about every single component, you're going to have one that's going to torpedo the entire model. So metrics tend to be the one that gets the least attention, the least love, and I would say probably that's the one that's the most important, because as human beings, we all tend to try and optimize whatever we're measured on, or whatever is on our, if you're driving a car, and what you're seeing is a speedometer, then you're going to control for your speed. But if I were to show you something else, you would optimize for something else. So if it's like MPG, you're going to try, at some point, you're going to try to optimize MPG. So I would urge you to think about metrics and how metrics can influence what your employees pay attention to.
So I have a question I've really been eager to ask. Olivier and Robert were guests on our podcast a few weeks back as their book launched. And Olivier, you in particular talked about an organization that you are not maybe yet working with. It's a very newsworthy organization. And you were talking specifically about how they could benefit from a clearer line of sight in using these ideas. Can you expand on that for us?
That's my little pet thing, right? Yeah. How many of you have been flying over the past 6 months, taken an airplane? Just about everybody, right? So there's a company that's been in the news that you probably would want to pay attention to if you're flying. It's Boeing, right? But so, if you go beyond the news and you see all the terrible things that happen at Boeing, when you try to understand why the company is in the state in which it is, which is kind of in trouble, it's interesting to do a little bit of a root cause analysis and say, could we use this mindset, this approach, to try to understand why the company seems to struggle so much? By the way, they're looking for a new CEO. So if anybody's interested in trying to lead Boeing, sort of thankless job these days, send your resume. But so I would probably encourage you to listen to the podcast for the details. But every one of those 5 KSEs, the way we call this, those factors, is something that Boeing struggles with. Leadership, they're replacing the CEO, so that tells you something about the leadership and the lost trust in the leadership. Strategic understanding, well, this is a company who try to produce planes that fly, but also make a lot of money. And it's hard to do both at the same time. And I think the way they tried to convey that message to employees got a little muddled, because it was clear that at some point people started to focus on making money at the expense of making planes that fly. Metrics probably play a role. There's one factor in those 5 that I think makes really has a lot of impact at Boeing, and I'm going to compare them to their main competitor, whose name is Airbus, which happens to be a European company, so I have a sense for how they work. And there's a massive difference between Boeing and Airbus when it comes to human capital. Do you know which one it is? The way they manage their talent. Well, there's a fundamental difference that is grounded in the fact that Boeing, being a very revenue and profit-centric company forever, has always adapted their workforce based on the ups and downs of the economy. So in times of recession, we're going to let go thousands of people. When the economy is booming and people fly again and we need more planes, we're going to hire people from wherever. We're going to train them. No worries. The problem with this is that in the short term, their profit is excellent because they shed costs when they need to shed costs, and they have the resources and the manpower when they need it to. But building planes is a very technical thing, right? You can't just take people and say, well, why don't you screw this thing here and hopefully it's going to fly. There's a lot of resident knowledge. And Boeing, by deciding to maximize profit and letting go of their workforce, has let go of that resident knowledge a little bit. Airbus, on the opposite, being a European company with a lot of oversight from governments, was never able to let go of their employees even when the going got tough in the economy. So a lot of cost, so not as profitable as Boeing, but the thing is they've kept the knowledge inside the company. And when you read the papers and you read that manufacturers on the line are using soap to help, I think, the windows or the doors adhere to, you're like, man, that's kind of very creative. That's kind of very innovative. But is it really grounded in technical knowledge? And so I wish, I think it's unlikely, but I wish I could talk to, the next CEO at Boeing and say, why don't you think about how you align your operation to your strategy using those 5 elements, and in particular on the human capital, think about the consequences of how you manage your talent. There's practical, direct consequences in how you hire and let go of employees. And ultimately, they end up in the news because of this. So there's many other companies in the news. You could take any company that, you talked about Tesla. In many ways, Tesla is an excellent example of great alignment. They have all their pieces together to do their job of producing great electric cars. Other companies really struggle because one or more of those elements are out of whack. And Boeing, I think, is a great example of a number of those.
If we can, thank you for that, Olivier. And that was such a great story to hear on the podcast. But Robert, I want to get back to something you said right at the beginning. And there are a couple of terms in the book that you use, the two of you use, profitless prosperity, right? But there's another one that I like even more that I'd like you to talk about. I just have by a show of hands, how many of you in here go through a strategic planning process? like a formal strategic planning okay, let's not say formal. Let's say you sit down and it's like, hey, I got to come up with a strategy. We're probably going to get some more hands there. All right. The term that I think is relevant is execution tax. And tell us more about that.
So when we don't have superlative execution, okay, we're getting burned by the last 6 inches, we pay an execution tax. It costs more to get things done because we're not executing superlatively. So having alignment around mission, vision, strategic intent mitigates that execution tax. And that execution tax is why profitless prosperity is such a big deal, and especially in 2024. I mean, the cost of doing business has gone up, and if we're not superlatively executing, our profits are getting burned by that execution tax. It's the last 6 inches that gets us.
Robert, say more about what you mean by, you're talking about getting the ball over the finish line, yes?
Correct.
Okay, just want to be clear on that. Good.
Sorry, I'm not supposed to say
thank
last 6.
I think that we'll open it up for questions here in just a minute, but I do want to ask if there, people will read the book, perhaps they'll take the copy with them, but if you could give them, what's one key takeaway? These are leaders of companies, they have teams, they may have question marks about the confidence their team has in them. They may even have question marks about, are we measuring the right things? What's one piece of advice you're going to give them tonight?
If you take nothing away, take this. The relentless communication of strategy. Mission, vision, strategic intent. Everyone in the organization needs to know it. It can't be the best kept secret.
You stole my thunder.
On purpose.
I don't know. And there's one more question I'd like to ask before we open it up. There are natural and normal things that inhibit implementation. And I would even say if you don't have a strategy, if you're kind of wondering, maybe we should sit down and craft a strategy. What are we doing in the next year? Where do we want to go? Because strategy is what gets us to the vision. Yeah. I just forgot what I was going to ask you.
But I think I've got it. Can I go with
Go,
that?
John. Thank you.
Well, so I asked how many people have a strategy, and we didn't have everybody raise your hands. I want to ask Olivier and Robert, in order for this to work, in order for the methodology in the book to work, do you even need a strategy? Or can this help direct or define that, or give you a stepping off point for some strategic model?
Thank you. No, I'm not sure. Yeah, well, right after grad school, I launched a business, and it was in 1999. Anybody remember what happened in 1999, 2000?
It was a great album.
Right, I had this bubble, right? And so, just like everybody else, I launched this business, and every day we would knock on the doors of venture capitalists with our idea, and our idea was fantastic. I can promise you it was the best idea in the world. And so we were like, yeah, we're going to do this. It's fantastic. No, and they were like, okay, and how will you execute? And we were not really quite sure how to execute. And the message was, ideas are cheap. I don't know whether I like the word strategy too much because it seems complicated and sophisticated and something that's only for big companies. But really, the strategy is, I'd like my business to look like this and be, that big in 2 years or 3 years. Call that a strategy, call that a plan, call that objectives, call that your ambition, your desire, your dreams. Doesn't really matter. But what matters is that you need to know where you want to go. And I bet that all of you have a sense for this. But I would say that's the easy part, really. Ideas are cheap. What really matters is how are we getting there? And I think I've seen enough companies who invested millions of dollars in strategic planning and suddenly think that magically things going to happen because the plan exists, right? No way. Your employees have to understand, they have to appreciate it, you have to think about every single element of it. So my takeaway is this. You have to have at least a sense for where you want to go. You have to say it with words. And I would encourage you to write it, because when you have to choose words, actual words, oh, we want to be a leader. I had a client last week saying, oh, we want to be a leader in the industry. How do you define leader? Are you the biggest? Are you the fastest? Are you the most profitable? Are you the one with the biggest building? Right, you have to be specific, because if you're not specific, your employees have no clue what you're trying to do. And therefore, they can really do a good job. They're going to try to do everything, and they're not going to do anything well. So whatever you call this, strategy, plan, goal, write it with words on a piece of paper, and be relentless in sharing that with everybody. They have to know it as well as you do. That would be my takeaway.
Can I piggyback on that real quick? I want to just kind of like demystify like mission, vision, and strategic intent. Okay, your mission is why do you exist? Okay, what do you serve? Why do you exist? Your strategic intent is like your functional strategy that all other strategies support, and then your vision is what do you want to be? What does it look like 1, 3, 5 years down the road? And it's got to be inspirational, and your employees got to love it. So that distilled, that simple. Write those 3 things down.
So there's a reason I asked that question, and I'm thinking about we have family-owned businesses here, and a lot of times with the rigor and everything that is happening during the day, really codifying what that looks like, we just haven't done it. It's a great idea, we haven't done it. So a takeaway is absolutely to do that. But when I think about in the middle, can you go back to the model on market discipline? Right there in the middle. So I don't know if everybody remembers Robert talking about operational excellence, innovation, and also customer intimacy. Well, Sarah's going to know exactly what I'm talking about. We took a client through this that really didn't have a formal strategy, and we got to the market discipline. We actually started there because it was really, who are we? How do we go to market? What is our value proposition? And about 12, 13 people of the senior team, and everybody, there was like an even split on all three of the market discipline areas. Couldn't agree. And we got into such, I would say it was a spirited discussion. I was going to say argument or debate, more of a spirited discussion about innovation. The CEO says, we're innovators and we're going to innovate. And it's like, okay, this is really healthy, but do you notice that the 12 of you are not on the same page? So if nothing else, we understand what our market discipline is, what we mean to our customers, that's huge. So the 5 KSEs may be a little more nuanced, but that market discipline is so critical to really starting to establish, mission, vision, and strategic intent.
John, in that same organization, in our discussions, it was discovered that in the human capital area, they had a host of employees. They'd grown quite a bit in a short amount of time. Not a huge organization. They had no way to contact their employees. There were no company emails. There was no standardized way to deliver information to their employees. And I mean, I see some eyes going, well, what? I think that, and it took them probably another 6 to 9 months to solve for that issue. But talk about sharing the news of strategic understanding and delivering our why and helping people embrace that. They had no connection to their employees, especially their frontline employees. They were a senior living care provider. So it's good, very good. Any last words from the two of you? I'd like to open it up to the audience. We have microphones, so if you have questions,
we
comments,
have a microphone, and I'll run it around.
Love to hear from you.
The heat lamps are on, which you all know is the indication that pizza is on its way, which is, I know, really what everybody's excited about.
Right.
And the bar is going to be open. Any questions? I'll pass the microphone around. Don't be bashful.
I have one thing left to say then.
Okay.
So the lens that when we wrote this book was just by reading the book and following the prescriptions, a company's going to get lift. So we brought a gift for you, everyone here. Take the book. We'd like to sign it for you and everything like that. Give it a read. Do what it says.
Right. Hey, and I do have one other question. Whatever it is each of these organizations is attempting to accomplish, there are blocks to implementation. There are standardized, normal, customary blocks that we may not be aware of. Can you just speak to that for a moment? so that maybe eyes could be opened a little bit differently. Sometimes when we're in it, we don't see it. We don't see what the block is. But what are the things that get in the way of us getting this stuff done?
So I like to look at blocks in two different things. Like, I mean, either it's an objection from your people, so they don't understand, so they're defiant against it, or there's an actual condition. And, you know, a condition, if we solve it, we can position, and when the condition changes, then we can move forward.
And we love real life examples. So if you have any of those, you know, what this was identified and this is what we did about it.
I have a client that has been scaling for the last 6 years, and they ran into a financial problem, and they couldn't move forward and build this new facility until they got money. So, I mean, there was a condition. When they got money, they built the facility, they continued to scale.
There's this guy named Ray Dalio. Do you know Ray Dalio? Ray Dalio is one of the wealthiest men in the U.S. He has the biggest hedge fund company in the world, I guess. He's also a little bit weird. I interviewed for his company. I wasn't selected, but it's the company where they tape every conversation. You go into a room, you talk about a topic, you click, you record the conversation. I don't know what I'm telling you this, probably just to say that it's a little bit weird. But I'm mentioning Ray Dalio because Ray Dalio says something that I think is very important. He says, you should never be afraid of the truth. You should never be afraid of the truth. Line of sight is really, when you think about this, is really just a diagnostic to understand how well your business is doing, how healthy your business is. That's why I'm saying you shouldn't be afraid of the truth. I'm sure that all of you have companies and businesses who are thriving or doing reasonably well. My hunch is you probably all have some opportunities for improvement. In our experience, 15, maybe 20%. Profit or revenue, depending on how you want to, what you want to measure. So I think it's worth it to understand how your business is doing. And you do this not just by trusting your own instinct, because you know your business well, but by asking your employees. And because your employees are deep in the business, they know how things work. And sometimes they know how things don't work. So I think it's worth asking them the question. And you'll find, for those of you who've taken the assessment, that's really not a huge amount of time or investment, just a bunch of questions. But I think you'll be amazed by the insight you get. And if you're not afraid of the truth, I think that's something you should do.
Thank you guys very much for being here and sharing your thoughts. Question about going to market. So I think in some cases, I agree with you. There's one of three ways to go. And sometimes the organizations say, but we kind of do all three. We have a primary and a secondary and a tertiary. Could you guys talk about your thoughts about that process and what you think about that idea?
Sure. I'll give an example of, so one of my companies is a manufacturing company. They build boats from like $400,000 for a base model to like 1.8 for their crazy 40-foot offshore thing. And when you look at how they manufacture the boat, all of that is operational excellence. Their base model boat kind of goes to market more operational excellence. They've limited variations, they've limited add-ons and stuff like that. But I mean, when you get into their flagship model, it's whatever you want. So I mean, it can work, but there generally is one main go-to-market strategy. But when you look at functions of an organization, there could be all three. You know, customer service. You know, what do you think customer service is? Customer intimacy, right? You know, operations. You know, it's going to be operational excellence.
Any other questions? Everybody can smell the pizza.
I am super caffeinated, by the way.
Couple of things. Please make sure you pick up your complimentary book, and I know Robert and Olivier would be happy to sign it. Somebody, we were talking earlier, it's always cool to get an autographed book by the authors. We appreciate the chance. Tony, thank you. Angie, thank you for this. We certainly appreciate it. And for those of you that have any questions about the reports that you did receive, that you took, we are here to answer those questions, Real Good Ventures or the guys up here. Not just tonight, I mean anytime. And for those of you that didn't take it and tonight has encouraged you to use your link, feel free to do it and we'll make sure you get your report. But I think if that's about it, Angie, is that right? Do you have something? I'm gonna. Perfect.
I always have words. So no, thank you, John, thank you, Sarah, the authors, Tony, thank you everyone for coming. Just a few logistical things. If you happen to have parked on campus and you got a ticket, let us know. Just send it to me. We'll take care of it. We did record the session. Thank you to Jim back there for our sound guy. Yeah. So we will put it on our website. Please feel free to share it with anyone, a colleague, anyone that you would think would find interesting. If you read the book and love it, please post about it on social media. Tag the authors, tag John and Sarah, tag us, tag Highland, tag everyone. We'll get the good word out. So with that, the pizza bar is open. Feel free to grab something. There is a cash bar. If you want to grab a drink, you can go out and grab a drink, bring it in. You can ask our server. Anything else is on us. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie.